Rain fell in a steady drizzle over St. James's Palace, the gray clouds above casting a somber mood over the historic courtyard. The cobblestones glistened with moisture, reflecting the muted light of the overcast sky, and the air carried the sharp scent of wet earth and damp wool from the tourists' coats. A smaller crowd than usual had gathered, huddled under umbrellas and raincoats, their voices subdued as they snapped photos of the royal guards stationed at the palace entrance. The guards stood resolute in their scarlet tunics and bearskin hats, their polished boots gleaming despite the weather, their faces carved from stone as they endured the chill. The scene was quieter than most days, the rain keeping the usual throngs of visitors at bay. But there was an undercurrent of restlessness in the air, a tension that seemed to ripple through the crowd like the ripples on the puddles beneath their feet. Among the tourists was Claire Bennett, a 32-year-old graphic designer from Chicago, her nerves frayed from a disastrous trip. Her flight had been delayed, her luggage lost, and the London weather had turned her dream vacation into a soggy nightmare. She clutched a lukewarm cup of coffee in her trembling hands, the paper cup dented from her tight grip, her umbrella forgotten in her hotel room. Her blonde hair was plastered to her forehead, her mascara smudged from the rain, and her patience had worn thin after a morning of mishaps. She had come to St. James's Palace hoping for a moment of magic, a glimpse of the royal tradition she'd seen in movies. But instead, she found herself cold, wet, and miserable. Her eyes darted around the courtyard, searching for something, or someone, to blame for her frustration, and they landed on the nearest royal guard, a solitary figure standing at his post, his gaze fixed straight ahead, unmoved by the rain or the crowd. The guard was a man in his late 30s, his face weathered but composed, his posture a testament to years of discipline. His tunic was darkened by the rain, but his bearskin hat remained tall and proud, droplets of water clinging to the fur like tiny jewels. To the casual observer, he was a symbol of tradition, a ceremonial figure meant to be photographed and admired, but there was a quiet intensity in his stillness, a depth in his dark eyes that hinted at a life beyond the palace gates. His hands, clasped behind his back, bore faint scars, marks of a past that few in the crowd could imagine, a past forged in the crucible of conflict where survival demanded more than ceremonial precision. The tourists didn't notice these details, but Claire, in her heightened state of agitation, saw only a target, a symbol of the rigid, unfeeling world that seemed to mock her misfortune. Claire pushed her way through the crowd, her sneakers slipping on the wet cobblestones, her frustration boiling over with each step. A family of tourists stepped aside, their umbrellas tilting as they watched her approach the guard with a scowl. A teenage boy in a raincoat whispered to his sister, his voice tinged with unease, wondering if the woman was about to do something stupid. But his sister shushed him, her eyes wide with anticipation. Claire stopped just a few feet from the guard, her chest heaving as she glared at him, her coffee cup trembling in her hand. The guard didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the rain-soaked courtyard. That stillness, that refusal to react was the final straw for Claire. She felt invisible, insignificant, and the weight of her ruined trip pressed down on her like the heavy clouds above. With a cry of frustration, Claire reared back and hurled her coffee at the guard, the lukewarm liquid arcing through the air in a brown streak, the paper cup tumbling end over end before it struck the guard's chest with a wet splat. The coffee splashed across his scarlet tunic, the dark stain spreading like ink on paper, dripping down to the cobblestones in a pathetic puddle. The crowd gasped, their umbrellas bobbing as they stepped back, their murmurs rising like the patter of the rain. A mother pulled her child closer, shielding his eyes, while an older man in a tweed cap shook his head in disapproval, muttering under his breath about the disrespect of tourists. Claire stood frozen, her hand still outstretched, her anger giving way to a sudden pang of fear as she realized what she'd done. The guard remained still, but there was a shift in the air, a subtle change that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone watching. The guard's eyes, which had been fixed straight ahead, slowly turned to meet Claire's, and the intensity in his gaze was like a physical force, pinning her in place. His face remained impassive, but there was a storm brewing behind those dark eyes, a controlled fury that spoke of battles fought and won, of moments where hesitation meant death. The crowd held its breath, the rain seeming to fall in slow motion as the guard took a single, deliberate step forward, his boots splashing in the puddle of coffee at his feet. The sound was sharp, a stark contrast to the soft patter of the rain, and it echoed through the courtyard like a warning shot. Claire stumbled backward, her sneakers slipping on the wet cobblestones, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized she might have made a terrible mistake. The guard's movements were slow, deliberate, each step a testament to his training, his discipline. He reached up and removed his bearskin hat, revealing a shaved head marked by a faint scar that ran from his temple to the back of his skull, a jagged line that told a story of survival, of a roadside bomb in a distant desert, where he had shielded a civilian child from the blast, his own body taking the brunt of the shrapnel. The crowd gasped, their whispers growing louder as they pieced together the guard's story, their phones raised to capture the moment, the rain blurring their screens. A retired soldier in the crowd, his own face scarred from years of service, nodded in recognition, his eyes filled with respect as he whispered to his wife about the guard's likely past in special forces, a past that had forged him into something far more dangerous than a ceremonial figure. Claire's hands trembled as she backed away, her earlier bravado replaced by a growing sense of dread. The guard set his hat down on the ground with a deliberate slowness, the rain pattering against the fur, and then he straightened, his gaze never leaving hers. He didn't shout, didn't raise his rifle, but there was a quiet menace in his movements, a predator's calm that made the crowd instinctively step back, their umbrellas tilting as they sought shelter from the storm they knew was coming. The guard reached into his tunic and pulled out a small folded handkerchief, the fabric crisp despite the rain, and began to wipe the coffee from his chest, his movements slow and methodical, each swipe a silent promise of retribution. The tension in the courtyard was palpable, the rain falling harder now, the drops drumming against the cobblestones like a war drum. Claire turned to run, her sneakers splashing through the puddles, but the guard was faster. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist with a grip like iron. The crowd gasped, their umbrellas bobbing as they watched in stunned silence, their phones capturing every moment. Claire screamed, her voice shrill against the rain, but the guard's expression remained unchanged, his eyes burning with a quiet fury that was more terrifying than any shout. He twisted her wrist just enough to make her drop to her knees, the pain shooting up her arm like a lightning bolt, her cries drowned out by the rain. The guard leaned down, his face inches from hers, and for the first time, he spoke, his voice low and steady, cutting through the storm like a blade. "Disrespect has a price," he said, his words heavy with the weight of experience, a warning that echoed with the ghosts of battles past. Claire's eyes widened, her fear giving way to a dawning realization of the man she had provoked, a man who had faced far worse than a thrown cup of coffee, a man who had survived horrors she couldn't imagine. The guard released her wrist, letting her collapse to the ground, her knees splashing in the puddle of coffee and rainwater, her sobs mingling with the patter of the storm. But the guard's revenge wasn't over. He stepped back, his movements calm and precise, and reached down to pick up the crumpled coffee cup from the ground. The crowd watched in silence, their breaths held as he turned the cup over in his hands, the rain washing away the last traces of coffee. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the cup back at Claire, the paper striking her chest with a wet thud before falling to the ground. It wasn't a violent act, but the symbolism was clear. A mirror of her own disrespect, a lesson in humility delivered with the precision of a soldier. Claire flinched, her hands trembling as she clutched at her chest, the weight of her actions crashing down on her like the rain. The guard returned to his post, picking up his bearskin hat and placing it back on his head with a slow, deliberate motion. His tunic was still stained with coffee, the dark mark a stark contrast against the scarlet fabric, but he stood tall, his gaze fixed straight ahead once more, his composure unshaken. The rain continued to fall, the droplets tracing paths down his face, but he didn't flinch, didn't waver, a living testament to the strength that lay beneath his ceremonial role. The crowd erupted into whispers, their phones buzzing with videos of the incident, the hashtag number St. James Guard trending within minutes as the story spread across social media. 2 more guards appeared from the palace entrance, their boots splashing through the puddles as they approached Claire, their faces stern as they helped her to her feet. She didn't resist as they escorted her away, her head bowed, her sobs muffled by the rain, the weight of her humiliation heavier than the storm. The crowd parted to let them through, their umbrellas tilting as they watched her go, their murmurs a mix of shock and awe. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip, their raincoats bright against the gray courtyard, whispered to their teacher, their eyes wide with wonder as they asked about the guard's scar, their perception of strength forever altered by what they had witnessed. As the rain began to ease, the courtyard slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, the tourists resuming their photos. But the atmosphere had changed. They had come for a glimpse of tradition, but they had witnessed something far more profound, a display of disciplined power, a reminder that true strength often lies in the stories we cannot see, etched into the scars and silences of those who stand guard. The guard remained at his post, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the rain washing away the last traces of coffee from the cobblestones, but the memory of his revenge lingered, a silent warning to anyone who might dare to cross him.